Coffee stained the rim of Dominic's saucer, sitting inches from a dark, crimson smudge on his cuff. He tossed a crumpled, heavily encoded letter onto the diner counter. $10 million to whoever can read this. He sneered a cruel joke aimed at his frustrated lieutenants. He didn't expect the exhausted girl, refilling his mug, to glance at the paper. He definitely didn't expect her to clear her throat and casually recite the exact assassination orders of his greatest rival. Rain lashed against the cracked glass of Booth 4, distorting the neon vacancy sign across the street into a smear of acidic pink. Chloe wiped a grey rag over the Formica table, pushing around a sticky ring of dried syrup. It was 3 a.m. The air in Sal's diner tasted of stale, frying oil bleach and burnt coffee. She scraped a hardened piece of chewing gum from the underside of a chair with her thumbnail, flicked it onto her dustpan, and sighed. Rent was 3 weeks late. Her phone had been shut off since Tuesday. The bell above the glass door chimed sharp and annoying. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the harsh scent of wet asphalt and ozone. 6 men walked through the door. They didn't look like the usual insomniacs or drunk college students. They moved with a synchronized, predatory stillness. Expensive wool coats ruined by the rain. Heavy boots. Eyes that scanned the empty diner, checking the exits, the kitchen doors, the shadows behind the counter. At the center of the group stood a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Chloe's college tuition, but the jacket was torn at the shoulder. He slid into the booth at the far corner, the one farthest from the windows. The leather groaned under his weight. His men flanked him, 2 sliding into the booth opposite, 3 standing by the counter. "Coffee!" One of the standing men barked, not looking at her. "Black. 6. Chloe didn't say a word. She walked behind the counter, grabbed a stack of heavy ceramic mugs, and filled them from the industrial percolator. Her hands ached. She placed the mugs on a tray and carried them over to the corner booth. Up close, the tension radiating from the men was suffocating. The air smelled sharp. Copper, gunpowder, sweat. The man in the charcoal suit was staring at a piece of paper on the table. It was thick, yellowed parchment, creased and stained with dark, rusty thumbprints. His jaw clenched, a muscle feathering near his ear. He looked up as Chloe set a mug down in front of him. His eyes were a flat, unreadable brown. Dead eyes. Nothing. One of the men across from him muttered, staring at a tablet. "I ran it through 3 translation matrices. It's not standard Cyrillic. It's not Chechen. It's gibberish Dom. A cipher." Dominic Rosie picked up the paper, holding it by the edges. He let out a low, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He tossed the parchment onto the table right next to the sugar dispenser. "Victor is laughing at us," Dominic said. His voice was a rasp, rough like dragged gravel. "He leaves this on Frankie's chest, a message we can't even read." He leaned back, rubbing his temples. $10 million. I'll give $10 million in cash to whoever can tell me what this dead bastard wrote." His men shifted uncomfortably. A few forced, dry chuckles. It was a joke born of deep, violent frustration. A billionaire's empty bet in a cheap diner. Chloe reached over to grab the empty creamer pitcher. Her eyes fell on the parchment. She paused. The letters were Cyrillic, yes, but the syntax was fragmented. It wasn't a cipher, it was a dialect. A very specific, nearly extinct dialect from a mountainous region bordering Georgia, heavily bastardized with Soviet-era gulag slang. She recognized the sharp, jagged consonants. She recognized the structure. She hadn't seen this language since her grandfather, a bitter exile who drank vodka like water, forced her to memorize his journals before he died of liver failure. He used to say it was the language of ghosts. Chloe stood there. The rag hung limp in her left hand. $10 million. She owed $40,000 in student loans, $3,000 in rent. She had $12 in her checking account. She cleared her throat. The sound was loud in the quiet diner. 6 pairs of eyes snapped to her. Cold, lethal. "It's not a cipher," Chloe said. Her voice was steady, though her knees felt like water. "It's Vinak, but an old variant, prison code." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Dominic slowly lowered his hands from his face. He stared at her. "What did you just say?" "I said," Chloe repeated, tapping the corner of the table with her index finger. "It's not gibberish. You're reading it left to right. This specific slang, you read the verbs last. It changes the entire context." One of the men standing by the counter reached into his coat. Dominic raised a single finger, and the man froze. "Read it," Dominic commanded softly. Chloe looked down at the parchment. She didn't touch it. "The hound thinks he has the scent," she read, translating seamlessly into English. "But the bear has already crossed the river. 3 shipments burn tonight at Pier 44. By dawn, the southern docks belong to Winter." She paused, squinting at the final line. "Give my regards to the boy king. Let him bury another friend." Dominic didn't blink. He sat perfectly rigid. One of his lieutenants pulled out a phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. "Dom, Pier 44. That's the armory. If Victor hits that tonight—" "Quiet," Dominic said. His eyes never left Chloe's face. He stood up. He was taller than she expected. He towered over her, casting a long shadow under the flickering fluorescent lights. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. "Chloe," she said, clutching her serving tray against her chest like a plastic shield. "And you owe me $10 million. 50 seconds passed. Chloe counted them by the erratic thumping of her own heart. The diner was a vacuum. Dominic Rossi stared down at her, analyzing her face for deceit, a trap, an ambush. He found only the deep purple bags under her eyes and the grease stains on her apron. "Pier 44, Dominic repeated. He turned his head slightly toward the man with the phone. "Call Marco. Tell him to lock down the armory, now." The man scrambled toward the diner door, dialing frantically. Dominic looked back at Chloe. "You speak a dead prison dialect. You sling coffee in a dump at 3 in the morning. Those two things don't go together." "Life is full of surprises," Chloe replied. Her mouth was completely dry. "Are you paying by check or wire transfer? Because I really need to make rent by Tuesday." A sharp, barking laugh tore out of the man sitting across from Dominic. Dominic shot him a look, and the laughter died instantly. "You think this is a game?" Dominic stepped closer. He smelled like expensive cologne and fresh rain. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip wasn't bruising, but it was absolute steel. "You think you can just read a note off a dead man's chest and ask for a payout? You made a bet," Chloe said, forcing herself not to pull away. Pulling away meant weakness. Her grandfather had taught her that much. I answered. "I don't care about your dead man. I don't care about your peer. I care about the money." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "If you're lying to me and my men go to that pier for nothing, I'll come back here and burn this place to the ground with you inside it. If I'm lying, you won't have to." She shot back. "But I'm not. The translation is accurate. Now let go of my arm." He held it for a second longer, feeling the steady racing pulse jumping against her skin. Then he let go. He reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek, black leather wallet. He didn't pull out cash. He pulled out a card. It was thick matte black with a single phone number embossed in silver. No name. He slid it across the wet formica. "Get your coat," Dominic said. Chloe stared at the card. "I'm working. My shift doesn't end until 6. "Your shift ended 5 minutes ago," Dominic stated, turning toward the door. You're coming with us. Like hell I am. Chloe snapped, taking a step back. I'm not getting into a car with a bunch of mobsters. Leave the money or leave the diner. Dominic stopped. He turned back, the exhaustion in his face replaced by a sudden terrifying clarity. Listen to me, Chloe. Whoever wrote that note knows we intercepted it. They know you just read it out loud in front of a giant window facing the street. He gestured toward the cracked glass. If you stay here, you'll be dead before the sun comes up. I need someone who can read Victor's codes. You need $10 million. Get your coat. Chloe looked out the window. Across the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows was idling by the curb. It hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. The exhaust plumed in the cold rain. Cynicism was a heavy blanket, and Chloe wore it well. She knew the police wouldn't help her. She knew running meant hiding, and she had no money to hide. She looked at the blood on Dominic's cuff. She looked at the black card on the table. She untied her apron, dropping it onto the floor. If I die, she said, her voice shaking just a fraction, I'm going to haunt you. Get in line, Dominic muttered. They walked out into the rain. The men formed a tight perimeter around her, shielding her with their bodies as they moved toward a row of black SUVs parked in the alley. The cold hit her instantly, seeping through her thin uniform shirt. Dominic opened the heavy door of the lead vehicle. He gestured for her to get in. She climbed into the back seat. It smelled like rich leather and mint. Dominic slid in beside her, pulling the door shut. The heavy thud of the door sealing cut off the sound of the storm completely. Drive, Dominic ordered the driver. The SUV surged forward. Chloe pressed herself against the door, putting as much distance between herself and Dominic as possible. She watched the neon lights of the diner fade into the rear-view mirror. Her life, pathetic and exhausting as it was gone. So, Chloe said, staring at the rain, streaking horizontally across the tinted window. Victor. Who is he aside from someone who writes terrible poetry? Dominic leaned his head back against the headrest and closed his eyes. Victor Volkov. He runs the Eastern Syndicate. He killed my father 6 months ago. Now he's trying to take the city. And you? She asked. I'm the guy trying to stop him. You don't look like a savior, she noted dryly. Dominic opened one eye and looked at her. In the shadows of the car, his face was unreadable. I'm not. I'm the guy who's going to kill him, and you're going to help me do it. The SUV tires crunched over wet gravel, finally coming to a halt. Chloe peered through the tinted glass, expecting a massive mobster mansion with marble columns and iron gates. Instead, they were parked inside an expansive, brutally modern underground garage. Harsh LED lights glared off the concrete floors. Armed men in tactical gear stood by concrete pillars, holding automatic rifles with a casual familiarity that made Chloe's stomach churn. Out, Dominic said, opening his door. Chloe followed him, wrapping her arms around herself. The underground air was freezing. She was led to a heavy steel elevator. Dominic swiped a keycard, and the doors slid open silently. They stepped inside, joined by 2 of the silent, heavily armed guards. The elevator shot upward. When the doors opened, Chloe stepped into a space that screamed sterile wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline wrapped in fog and rain. The floors were dark hardwood. The furniture was minimalist black leather and chrome. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal touches. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress dressed up as a penthouse. Arthur, Dominic called out, stripping off his ruined jacket and tossing it over a chair. An older man, dressed impeccably in a 3-piece suit, emerged from down the hall. He had silver hair and eyes that looked like shattered glass. He looked at Dominic, then his gaze snapped to Chloe. He didn't bother hiding his disdain. Dom, Arthur said, his voice clipped. Marco called from the armory. They stopped the hit. 5 of Victor's men dead. We lost 2. Dominic rubbed his jaw, letting out a heavy breath. Better than losing the whole cache. We have an edge. He pointed at Chloe. This is Chloe. She translated the drop. Arthur's eyebrows crept upward. He looked her up and down, taking in her scuffed sneakers and cheap diner uniform. She looks like she barely survived high school. I survived a master's degree in Eurasian linguistics, actually. Chloe said, crossing her arms. And I read Victor's dead language, which is more than your expensive software managed to do. Arthur's eyes hardened. Careful, girl. Set her up in the study. Dominic interrupted his tone, leaving no room for argument. Bring the boxes, all of them. Everything we've intercepted from Victor's couriers over the last 6 months. Arthur frowned. Damn, those files are highly sensitive. You're bringing an outsider into... The outsider just saved the southern docks. Dominic snapped his voice, echoing in the large room. He took a breath, reeling his temper back in. Bring the boxes, Arthur. Now. 10 minutes later, Chloe found herself sitting at a massive mahogany desk in a windowless room. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing nothing but ledgers and blank binders. On the desk sat 3 heavy cardboard boxes, overflowing with papers, photographs, and leather-bound notebooks. Dominic stood in the doorway, watching her. He had changed into a clean black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal dark ink snaking up his forearms. $10 million, Dominic said, leaning against the doorframe. That's the deal. You translate everything in those boxes. You find out where Victor is operating from, who is on his payroll, and when his next strike is. You give me his head on a platter and you walk away wealthy. Chloe pulled a stack of papers from the nearest box. They were filled with the same jagged handwriting. And if I don't? Then you stay here until you do, Dominic said simply. Kidnapping. Classy. Survival. Realistic. He walked over to the desk, standing just inches from her chair. You think you're above this because you pour coffee for a living? You're in it now. Victor's men saw you. To them, you're my asset. They will hunt you, skin you, and leave you on my doorstep just to make a point. Chloe looked up at him. She was terrified, but she refused to let him see it. The diner had taught her how to deal with aggressive men. You don't shrink. You stare back. I don't think I'm above anything, Chloe said quietly. I know exactly what my life is worth. It's worth a pile of unpaid bills and a broken heating unit. You're the one throwing around millions like it's loose change. I'm just doing a job. Dominic stared at her for a long moment. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, or just curiosity passed through his dead eyes. Start reading, he said, turning away. Over the next 5 hours, the penthouse remained quiet. Chloe worked systematically. She categorized the documents by date, matching the ink and handwriting styles. It was a tedious, agonizing process. Victor Volkov wasn't just using an obscure dialect. He was using a layered code. He referred to his captains as animals. He referred to locations by coordinates hidden within fake supply orders. Her head pounded. Her eyes burned. But she didn't stop. The promise of the money was a drug. 10 million. She could buy a house. She could pay off the debt that had crushed her family. She could disappear. Around 8 in the morning, the door opened. Dominic walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He set one down next to her notebook. It wasn't diner sludge. It smelled like rich, dark roast. Find anything? He asked, sitting in a leather chair across the room. Chloe took a sip. It was perfect. He's paranoid, she said, rubbing her eyes. He doesn't trust his own men. He handles all the high-level communications himself. I've decoded his supply routes. He's moving weapons through the old meatpacking district, not the ports. Dominic nodded slowly. Good. What else? Chloe hesitated, looking down at a small red notebook she had pulled from the bottom of the second box. He's planning something bigger than the armory. He calls it the eclipse. He mentions a date. 3 days from now. Dominic leaned forward, the casual posture vanishing. Where? I don't know yet, Chloe admitted. The location is encrypted differently. It's a series of numbers that don't correspond to coordinates. Break it. I'm trying. She snapped, her exhaustion fraying her temper. I'm not a machine. I need time. Dominic stood up, walking back over to the desk. He leaned over, his hands planted flat on the wood, trapping her in her seat. He was so close she could see the faint scar running through his left eyebrow. We don't have time, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. In 3 days I'm supposed to meet the heads of the 5 families for a summit. If Victor is planning a hit, that's where he'll do it. He could wipe us all out in one strike. Chloe stared back at him. She saw the desperation masking the anger. He wasn't just a ruthless killer. He was a man holding on to an empire by his fingernails. Then I suggest, Chloe said, not breaking eye contact, you let me work, and maybe get me a sandwich, because if I pass out from low blood sugar, your $10 million investment goes to waste. Dominic held her gaze for a second longer, then let out a sharp exhale that sounded almost like a laugh. He pushed off the desk. Turkey or ham? He asked, walking toward the door. Turkey, she said. And don't skimp on the mayo. As the door clicked shut, Chloe let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She looked back down at the red notebook. The numbers stared back at her. She traced them with her pen, her mind racing. She was in the belly of the beast, working for a monster to catch a bigger monster. And heaven help her, she was actually starting to care whether the monster survived. Mayonnaise dripped onto the corner of a classified ledger. Chloe barely noticed. She wiped it away with her thumb and licked it off, chewing her turkey sandwich with the mechanical rhythm of a woman running purely on spite and stale caffeine. Time had lost its meaning inside the windowless study. Her phone was dead confiscated by Arthur, leaving her with only the hum of the central air conditioning to mark the passing hours. Dominic's files were a chaotic mess of hubris and paranoia. Viktor Volkov didn't just write in code. He wrote in riddles wrapped inside a dying language. Numbers blurred together on the page. She rubbed her eyes until sparks danced in her vision, forcing herself to look at the red notebook again. The eclipse. 3 days, followed by a string of digits 411291. She had tried everything. Dates, coordinates, book ciphers using Russian literature, bank routing patterns. Nothing fit. She threw her pen across the desk. It clattered against a heavy crystal ashtray. Footfalls sounded in the hallway, soft but deliberate. Dominic appeared in the doorway, sans suit jacket, a holster strapped tightly over his ribcage. He carried a fresh carafe of water, setting it on the desk. He didn't ask if she had found anything. He just watched her, his expression a wall of cold stone. You look like you're about to snap a pencil in half. He noted, pulling up a chair and sitting backward, resting his arms on the backrest. Your rival is a dramatic sociopath. Chloe muttered, dragging a hand through her tangled hair. These numbers, 411291, they aren't a geographic location. They aren't a time. I thought they might be shipping containers, but the prefix codes are wrong. Dominic leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the notebook. Read the surrounding text again. Tell me exactly what he wrote before the numbers. Chloe pulled the notebook closer. He says, the roots of the old oak are rotten. We will strike the iron heart and the canopy will fall. The eclipse begins at... And then the numbers. Silence stretched between them. Dominic stared at the desk, his jaw working as he chewed on the inside of his cheek. He reached out, his calloused fingers grazing the edge of the paper. Roots, Dominic whispered. Iron heart, canopy. Metaphors, Chloe said, waving a hand. He talks like a cheap villain in a comic book. He doesn't do metaphors, Dominic corrected sharply. Victor is a butcher. He's literal. He used to be a structural engineer before he started cutting throats for the syndicate. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood. Where is the summit being held? Arthur booked it. How would I know? Chloe shot back. I just pour coffee, remember? Dominic pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing a number. He pressed it to his ear. Arthur, the summit venue. Where did the commission agree to meet? He paused, listening. The color slowly drained from his face. The Grand Meridian. Dominic said aloud, his voice dropping an octave. He hung up the phone and looked at Chloe. It's a hotel downtown. They just finished a massive renovation, added a glass atrium, a canopy. Chloe's stomach dropped. And the roots? The underground parking structure. Dominic stepped closer to the desk, tapping the string of numbers with his index finger. These aren't dates, Chloe. They're load-bearing pillars. Sub-level 4 Section 11 pillars, 2, 9, and 1. The central support cluster. Realization hit her like a physical blow. He's not going to send gunmen to the meeting. He's going to blow the foundation. He's going to drop the entire building on top of you. The eclipse, Dominic said grimly, blacking out the sun. He turned toward the door, yelling for Arthur. The older man appeared almost instantly, an automatic weapon already slung over his shoulder. Get a tactical team, Dominic ordered, grabbing his jacket from the hook by the door. We're going to the Meridian, right now. Dom, wait, Arthur argued, blocking the doorway. If Victor planted explosives, we need the bomb squad, not our guys. Let the cops handle it. If we call the cops, the summit is cancelled, and Victor knows we're onto him. He slips back into the shadows and tries again tomorrow. Dominic shoved his arms into his jacket, checking his sidearm. We go down there, we find the charges, and we pull them. We do it quietly. Arthur scowled, his pale eyes flicking toward Chloe. And what about her? She's a liability. She comes with us, Dominic said. Chloe shot out of her chair. Excuse me, no, absolutely not. I solved your riddle. My job here is done. Your job is done when I know those pillars are actually rigged, Dominic said, walking back to her. He didn't look angry. He looked completely, terrifyingly focused. If you're wrong about the translation, if this is a trap to lure me into the garage, I need you there to read whatever he left behind. You want your 10 million, you earn it. I signed up for translation, not a suicide mission. Dominic leaned down, invading her personal space. He smelled of gun oil and peppermint. You signed up to survive. Get your coat, Chloe. We're leaving. Rain continued to batter the city, turning the streets into slick black mirrors, reflecting the bleeding neon of the skyline. Chloe sat rigidly in the back of the SUV, her fingers digging so hard into the leather seats, her knuckles ached. Dominic sat beside her, silent, a heavy assault rifle resting casually across his knees. 2 other SUVs flanked them, a dark convoy slicing through the midnight traffic. Fear was a cold, physical thing sitting heavy in her chest. She had spent her entire life trying to be invisible. Invisible people didn't get evicted. Invisible people didn't attract attention. Now she was riding shotgun with a Mafia boss to stop a skyscraper from being turned into a tomb. Breathe, Dominic said softly, not looking at her. I am breathing. She snapped, her voice trembling slightly. You're hyperventilating. Close your eyes. Count to 4 on the inhale, hold for 4, out for 4. Don't give me breathing exercises, Chloe muttered, staring out the window. Give me a bulletproof vest. Dominic reached under his seat and pulled out a heavy black Kevlar vest. He tossed it into her lap. Put it on, over your coat. She stared at the thick armor, then at him. She didn't argue. She slipped it over her head, struggling with the heavy Velcro straps. Dominic reached over, swatting her hands away. He pulled the straps tight, securing the vest tightly against her ribs. His knuckles brushed against her side, a brief, unintentional touch that grounded her amidst the panic. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You don't run unless I tell you to run. You don't scream. You stay quiet, and you stay low. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. The vehicles descended into the gaping concrete mouth of the Grand Meridian's underground garage. It was cavernous and dimly lit, smelling of damp cement and exhaust. They drove down past 3 levels of empty parking spots before hitting sub-level 4. The SUVs screeched to a halt in a loose triangle, their headlights illuminating a massive open expanse of concrete pillars. "Out!" Dominic commanded. Doors flew open. 10 men spilled out into the garage, weapons raised, sweeping the area. Chloe stumbled out behind Dominic, the heavy vest throwing off her balance. The air down here was freezing. "Section 11. Dominic murmured, pointing his flashlight toward a cluster of thick, steel-reinforced pillars near the center of the garage. They moved forward as a unit. The silence was absolute, broken only by the squeak of tactical boots on the painted concrete. Chloe stayed glued to Dominic's back, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. They reached Pillar 2. Dominic shone his light on the base. Nothing. Just grey cement. He moved to Pillar 9. Nothing. "Check Pillar 1, he ordered his men. Arthur jogged over to the final pillar. He crouched down, running a hand along the seam where the concrete met the floor. "Dom, over here." Dominic grabbed Chloe's arm, pulling her with him. Tucked behind the massive concrete column wedged into a shallow maintenance recess was a heavy canvas duffel bag. Wires spilled out of the zipper, connecting to blocks of greyish putty slapped directly onto the load-bearing steel. A digital timer sat atop the explosives, the red numbers glowing softly in the dark. 4:12:00. 4 hours. Arthur said, his voice tight. "Right when the summit begins." "Can you disarm it?" Dominic asked, staring at the wires. "I'm not touching that," Arthur replied flatly. "That's military-grade C4 wired to a tamper switch. We need a professional." Dominic cursed under his breath. He turned to Chloe. "You were right. The translation was perfect." "Great!" Chloe swallowed hard. "Can I get my money and go home now?" Tires screamed in the distance. The sound echoed through the concrete cavern, violent and sudden. Headlights slashed through the darkness as 3 black vans tore around the corner of the ramp, hurtling straight toward them. "Ambush!" Arthur roared, raising his rifle. Gunfire erupted. It wasn't like the movies. It was deafening, a physical pressure that punched the air out of Chloe's lungs. Concrete exploded into dust and shrapnel as bullets chewed through the pillars around them. Dominic didn't hesitate. He grabbed Chloe by the collar of her vest and threw her to the ground, diving on top of her as a spray of bullets shattered the windshield of their SUV. "Stay down," he bellowed over the roar of automatic fire. Chloe covered her head with her arms, squeezing her eyes shut. The noise was unbearable. She smelled burning rubber and copper. Men were shouting, screaming. Hot brass casings rained down around them, clattering against the cement. Dominic rolled off her, popping up to a knee and firing controlled, precise bursts from his rifle. He wasn't panicked. He operated with a terrifying mechanical efficiency. "Arthur, flank right!" Dominic yelled, dropping an empty magazine and slamming a fresh one home. "Too many of them." "Dom," Arthur shouted back from behind a concrete barrier. "They knew we'd come." A bullet sparked against the pillar, inches from Chloe's face, showering her in stinging concrete dust. She let out a choked gasp, scrambling backward. Dominic grabbed her arm, hauling her up. "We have to move now." He dragged her toward the stairwell doors 50 yards away. They sprinted through the crossfire. Chloe ran blindly, her legs heavy, her lungs burning. The world was a blur of muzzle flashes and screaming metal. A dark figure stepped out from behind a parked car, raising a shotgun directly at them. Dominic shoved Chloe hard into a structural column, stepping in front of her. The shotgun blasted. Dominic jerked violently backward, a grunt escaping his lips as he hit the ground. Chloe screamed pure terror, gripping her throat. The gunman pumped the shotgun, stepping forward to finish the job. Before he could fire, Arthur materialized from the shadows, putting 2 rounds directly into the man's chest. The gunman collapsed. Arthur rushed over, grabbing Dominic by the webbing of his vest and hauling him up. "Go move." Dominic staggered, his hand clutching his left side, but he kept moving. He grabbed Chloe's hand, his grip slick with something warm and wet. They slammed through the heavy fire doors of the stairwell, Arthur covering their retreat. The heavy steel door clicked shut, muffling the gunfire. They scrambled up 3 flights of stairs, lungs screaming, before bursting into an empty service corridor. Dominic slumped against the cinder block wall, sliding down to the floor. He let his head fall back, his breathing shallow and jagged. Chloe dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands were shaking violently. She looked down at his left side. His dark shirt was torn, soaked in thick, dark blood just below the rib cage. The Kevlar had caught the brunt of the blast, but a piece of buckshot had caught him underneath the panel. "You're bleeding," she said, stating the obvious in a voice she barely recognized. "Astute observation." Dominic rasped, a weak, cynical smile touching his lips. He winced as he pressed his hand against the wound. You earned your 10 million today, kid." Chloe stared at the blood on her hands. The diner felt like 1,000,000 years ago. She looked at the mob boss bleeding out on a dirty linoleum floor, and for the first time, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had just taken a bullet for her. Arthur cursed, a harsh, jagged sound that bounced off the cold cinder block walls. He dropped his rifle, sliding to his knees beside Dominic. The older man's hands moved with practiced, ruthless efficiency, ripping the heavy Kevlar vest away to expose the ruined fabric of Dominic's shirt. Chloe pressed her spine against the wall. Her chest heaved. Her ears rang with a high, sustained whine from the shotgun blast. She stared at the dark, wet stain spreading across Dominic's ribs. "Is he dying?" she asked. The words felt disconnected, floating out of her mouth like they belonged to someone else. "Not today." Arthur grunted. He pressed a wad of sterile gauze from his tactical pouch hard against the wound. Dominic's head snapped back, his jaw locking tight as a hiss escaped his clenched teeth. The panel caught the spread. "It's a graze. Deep, messy, but the buckshot didn't core his organs. We need to move. Victor's cleanup crew will be here in less than 2 minutes. Dominic opened his eyes. They were glassy, but the dangerous focus remained. He looked at Chloe, taking in her trembling hands and chalk-white face. "Get up, kid," he ordered, his voice a raspy whisper. "We walk." They didn't go back to the penthouse. The penthouse was compromised. If Victor knew about the hotel, he knew about Dominic's primary residences. Arthur drove them in a stolen sedan through the labyrinth of back alleys, navigating the storm-drenched city, until they reached a nondescript apartment complex on the industrial east side. Fluorescent lights buzzed erratically in the hallway. The safe house smelled of stale cigarettes and pine cleaner. It was sparsely furnished, a sagging leather couch, a heavy wooden dining table, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been used in a decade. Arthur hauled Dominic through the door and draped him over the kitchen island. "Lock the deadbolt." Arthur barked at Chloe, already tearing open cabinets to retrieve a heavy black medical kit. "Draw the blinds. Don't touch the windows." Chloe did as she was told, her movements stiff. The adrenaline was leaving her system, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion and a bone-chilling cold. She walked over to the kitchen. Under the harsh overhead light, the reality of Dominic's injury was impossible to ignore. The skin along his left oblique was torn open, a ragged, ugly gash, weeping dark crimson. Arthur poured half a bottle of clear antiseptic directly into the wound. Dominic didn't scream. His hands gripped the edge of the faux granite counter so hard the knuckles turned completely white. A single cord of muscle stood out on his neck. He breathed through his nose, his eyes fixed on a crack in the ceiling plaster. "Hold this," Arthur commanded, shoving a fresh pad of gauze into Chloe's hands. "Press down, hard. I need to prep the needle." Chloe hesitated. I'm not a nurse." "I don't need a nurse. I need a clamp." Arthur snapped. "Push." She stepped forward and pressed her hands over the gauze. The heat of Dominic's skin radiated through the fabric. He flinched at her touch, but then forced his muscles to relax, accommodating her weight. She pushed down, feeling the steady, rhythmic thud of his heartbeat under her palms. "You're shaking," Dominic murmured. "I just got shot at—" Chloe shot back, her voice brittle. "I think I'm entitled to a little neurological instability." A dry chuckle vibrated in his chest, cut short by a wince. "You didn't run?" "I was wearing 40 pounds of Kevlar. I couldn't run if I wanted to." Arthur approached with a curved suture needle and thick black thread. "Move your hands, girl." Chloe stepped back, wiping her hands on her ruined jeans. She watched as Arthur began to stitch the torn flesh. It was brutal, unrefined work. Dominic squeezed his eyes shut, his breathing shallow. For the first time since he had walked into the diner, he looked human. He looked breakable. "Why did you do it?" Chloe asked quietly. The question slipped out before she could stop it. Dominic opened one eye. "Do what?" "Step in front of me. You need me to translate the notebooks, sure, but $10 million buys a lot of linguists. You didn't have to take a bullet." Dominic turned his head to look at her. The cynical, dead-eyed mobster was gone, replaced by an exhausted man leaning on a cheap kitchen counter. "You're civilian Chloe. You only stepped into this life because I dragged you into it. My father built this syndicate on a code. You don't let the people working for you take the fall." He gritted his teeth as Arthur pulled a knot tight. "Besides, if you died, I'd have to find someone else to decipher Victor's terrible poetry. I don't have the patience." Chloe let out a shaky breath, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked away, staring at the peeling wallpaper. She had spent the last 5 years of her life entirely alone, drowning in debt, convinced the world was a machine designed to grind people into dust. Nobody had ever stood between her and a threat. Nobody had ever protected her. "Done," Arthur announced, snipping the thread. He taped a heavy waterproof bandage over the stitches. "It's ugly, but it'll hold. Keep off your feet, Dom." Dominic slid off the counter, swaying slightly before catching his balance. He grabbed a clean black t-shirt from a duffel bag on the floor and pulled it carefully over his head. "No time to rest," Dominic said, walking stiffly toward the dining table. "Victor triggered the ambush. That means he knows we found the C4. The summit is blown. He's going to make a move to take the city tonight, while he thinks we're crippled." He looked at Chloe. The intensity was back in his eyes, burning brighter than before. "Get the red notebook," he ordered. "Victor is directing his men from somewhere. He wouldn't leave an operation this big to his lieutenants. He's in the city. Find out where." Rain hammered relentlessly against the frosted window pane, a rhythmic driving beat that framed the heavy silence in the safe house. Chloe sat at the dining table, surrounded by the salvaged contents of Dominic's cardboard boxes. Arthur had managed to grab her translation notes before they fled the penthouse. Now they were spread across the scarred wood in a chaotic mosaic of Cyrillic script and English cross-references. Dominic sat across from her. He had poured himself 3 fingers of cheap bourbon from a bottle he found above the fridge. He wasn't drinking it for the taste. He was using it to numb the searing pain radiating from his ribs. "You're looking in the wrong place," Dominic said, quietly, watching her trace a line of text with the back of her pen. Chloe didn't look up. "I'm looking exactly where the syntax tells me to look." He's a tactician. He doesn't write down his own address. No, but he writes down his supply chain. She counted, flipping a page in the red notebook. Her eyes were burning. She had been awake for over 24 hours. He needs line-of-sight communication. The C4 in the hotel garage was rigged to a tamper switch, but it also had a remote receiver. Arthur said so. Arthur grunted from his position by the door, checking the action on a fresh rifle. It was an RF receiver, short range. Whoever had the detonator had to be within a 2-mile radius of the meridian. Chloe tapped the notebook. Exactly. And earlier I translated a passage where he called his captains animals. He calls himself the bear. Listen to this entry from 2 days ago. The bear watches the canopy fall from the eagle's nest. Bring the iron birds to the roost at midnight. Dominic frowned, leaning forward. He winced, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. Eagle's nest, high ground. Iron birds. Chloe muttered, her brain connecting the scattered fragments of Vinak slang. In the 1990s, the Chechen syndicates used the term iron birds to refer to helicopters. If he's expecting helicopters at midnight, he needs a helipad. Dominic finished the pieces, slamming into place. He's watching the meridian from a high-rise with roof access. He planned to detonate the hotel, watch the foundations collapse, and extract via chopper before the dust even settled. Dominic pulled a burner phone from his pocket, his thumbs moving rapidly. He pulled up a topographic map of the downtown grid. 2-mile radius of the meridian, high rises with operational helipads. He pushed the phone across the table. Chloe leaned over. 3 buildings fit the criteria. One was a corporate bank, heavily secured. One was a residential tower. The third was a half-finished commercial high-rise construction halted due to permit issues. The Vanguard Tower, Dominic said softly, tapping the third option. It's empty. No security. Unobstructed view of the meridian. Arthur walked over, looking over Dominic's shoulder. It's a fortress, Dom. If he's up there, he's got the stairwells locked down and the elevators killed. We have half a dozen guys left who aren't bleeding out or dead. We can't storm a skyscraper. We don't need to storm it. Dominic replied, his voice deadly calm. He looked up at Arthur. He thinks I'm dead in a parking garage. He thinks the families are panicking. He's waiting for midnight to watch the hotel drop. We go up the service elevator shafts. We hit him in the dark. It's suicide, Arthur said flatly. It's a decapitation strike. Dominic corrected. He drained the rest of his bourbon and set the glass down with a heavy thud. He looked at Chloe. She felt the weight of his stare. It was heavy, evaluating, and surprisingly gentle. Arthur, Dominic said, not breaking eye contact with her. Wire the money, 10 million. Route it through the Cayman accounts into her checking. Chloe froze. Her heart skipped a beat. What? You did the job, Dominic said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of car keys, sliding them across the table. There's a grey Honda parked 2 blocks east. It's clean. Take it. Drive out of the state. Don't stop until you hit the coast. Change your name, buy a house, disappear. She stared at the keys. They represented everything she had ever wanted. Freedom. Safety. A life where she didn't have to scrape gum off diner chairs to survive. She reached out her fingers, brushing the cold metal. Then she looked at Dominic. He was pale, sweating, nursing a gunshot wound he took because he refused to let her die in the crossfire. He was walking into a suicide mission to kill a man who would undoubtedly hunt her down if he survived the night. If you die, Chloe said, her voice tight, Victor wins. That's the risk. If Victor wins, he owns the city. He owns the cops. He'll look into who translated his encrypted drops. I left my apron at the diner. I left my fingerprints on your desk. I can't outrun a billionaire mobster with an army, Dominic. $10 million won't stop a bullet. Dominic's jaw tightened. I gave you an out, Chloe. Take it. I don't want an out. She pushed the keys back across the table. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. A cold, cynical resolve settled in her chest, heavy and unbreakable. "I want Victor dead." Arthur scoffed from the corner. "What are you going to do, girl? Talk him to death in a dead language?" Chloe ignored him. She kept her eyes on Dominic. "He communicates through ledgers, right? Physical drops. He doesn't trust digital. Which means if he's extracting tonight, he has his master ledger with him. The book that lists every politician, every dirty cop, every offshore account he controls." Dominic's eyes widened slightly. "The Black Book. You go up there to kill him," Chloe said, leaning over the table. "His men will burn that book before you can grab it. You'll cut off the head, but the body will survive. You need someone who knows exactly what it looks like, someone who can grab it and verify it before the building burns." Dominic stared at her. "You're out of your mind. You have no idea what you're asking to step into. I'm stepping into the only scenario where I get to live a long, boring life," Chloe stated. She grabbed her pen and slid it into her pocket. "So, are we going to this tower, or are we going to sit here drinking cheap whiskey until midnight?" A long, heavy silence filled the room. Dominic looked at the keys, then at Chloe. Slowly a smirk cut across his face. It was a terrifying, brilliant expression. "Arthur," Dominic said, standing up. He grabbed his sidearm from the table, checking the chamber. "Get the gear. We're taking the Vanguard." Wind howled through the exposed steel skeleton of the Vanguard Tower, a mournful, hollow sound that swallowed the noise of the city below. The building was a monument to dead money, 70 stories of raw concrete and naked girders reaching blindly into the storm. They bypassed the ground floor entirely. Arthur cut the chain on a perimeter construction fence, leading them through a maze of flooded foundation trenches to the exterior maintenance hoists. The freight elevator groaned in protest as Arthur bypassed the security relay, hot-wiring the console with a heavy sparking cable. "We take this to floor 60, Arthur muttered, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. "The tracks end there. We climb the last 10 flights in the central stairwell." Dominic leaned heavily against the rusted cage. His face was the color of ash. The pain in his side had to be blinding, but his eyes were locked upward, fixed on the dark canopy of the unfinished roof. He checked his rifle, ejecting the magazine and slapping it back into the well with a sharp, metallic clack. Chloe stood in the corner of the hoist, her hands shoved deep into her pockets to stop them from shaking. She kept her eyes on the floor. The cage lurched violently, then began its slow, grinding ascent. The city dropped away beneath them. Rain blew sideways through the wire mesh, soaking them in seconds. The neon bleed of the streets faded, replaced by the deep, suffocating black of the storm. Nobody spoke. The silence was heavier than the Kevlar vest weighing down Chloe's shoulders. At floor 60, the hoist ground to a brutal halt. The gates slid open with a screech of metal on metal. They stepped out onto a massive, unpartitioned concrete floor. Plastic sheeting flapped wildly in the wind, creating a chaotic drumbeat that masked the sound of their approach. Dominic took the lead. He moved with a stiff, unnatural gait, his left arm held tight against his ribs. They navigated the debris-strewn floor, moving toward the concrete core of the building. Arthur halted, suddenly raising a closed fist. 2 men stood by the heavy steel door of the central stairwell. They wore heavy tactical gear assault rifles slung casually over their chests. One of them was smoking the small orange cherry illuminating the harsh angles of his face. Dominic didn't hesitate. He raised his suppressed pistol. 2 quiet, snapping sounds cut through the wind. The guards dropped instantly, hitting the concrete with a heavy thud. "Clear," Dominic rasped. They reached the stairwell. Arthur pushed the heavy door open. It was pitch black inside, smelling of wet cement and stale urine. 10 flights, Arthur said, looking at Dominic. "You going to make it, Dom? Worry about your own knees, old man." Dominic shot back, pushing past him. The climb was agony. Chloe's thighs burned, Her lungs dragged in the damp, freezing air. She stayed right behind Dominic, watching his broad shoulders heave with every step. Twice his boot slipped on the slick concrete. Twice he caught himself on the railing, swallowing a groan of pure agony. She instinctively reached out to steady him, her hand pressing against the middle of his back. He didn't push her away. He leaned into the contact for a fraction of a second, drawing breath, before pulling himself up to the next step. They reached the 70th floor landing. A sliver of pale light bled from beneath the heavy rooftop access door. Dominic pressed his back against the cinderblock wall. He looked at Arthur, holding up 3 fingers. Arthur nodded, unhooking a flashbang grenade from his harness. Dominic turned his gaze to Chloe. "You stay in the stairwell. You do not step out onto that roof until the shooting stops. When it's quiet, you find the ledger. You don't look at Victor. You don't look at the men. You find the book, and you get back in this stairwell." "Understood," Chloe whispered. Dominic reached out his hand, gripping her shoulder. His fingers were cold, his grip grounding and firm. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He turned away, pulling his rifle tight to his shoulder. Arthur pulled the pin. He kicked the heavy access door open. The hinges screamed. Arthur lobbed the canister into the light. "Execute!" Dominic barked. A blinding white flash erupted beyond the doorway, followed instantly by a concussive boom that rattled the teeth in Chloe's skull. Dominic and Arthur surged through the smoke. Gunfire tore the night apart. The noise was absolute, a deafening, chaotic roar that echoed off the surrounding skyscrapers. Men screamed in Russian. Heavy caliber rounds slammed into the concrete door frame, inches from Chloe's face, showering her with razor-sharp splinters of rock. She crouched on the landing, covering her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. The instinct to run down the stairs was overwhelming. It clawed at her throat. But she forced herself to stay. She forced herself to breathe. Find the book. The rapid, frantic popping of rifles gave way to heavier, measured bursts. Dominic's signature rhythm. 2 shots, a pause, 2 shots. Then silence. The wind howled, rushing through the open doorway, dragging the bitter scent of cordite and burning plastic into the stairwell. "Clear!" Arthur's voice called out. It sounded strained. Chloe scrambled to her feet and pushed through the doorway. The roof was a sprawling, flat expanse of wet concrete. Floodlights powered by a roaring portable generator cut harsh circles of white light through the driving rain. 5 bodies lay scattered across the deck. Near the edge of the roof, standing by a heavy folding table, was Viktor Volkov. He didn't look like a mob boss. He looked like an accountant. He wore a heavy beige trench coat, his thinning grey hair plastered to his skull by the rain. In his right hand he held a heavy silver revolver. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, blood pouring from a shattered shoulder. Dominic stood 20 feet away, his rifle aimed squarely at Victor's chest. Dominic's breathing was shallow and ragged. Blood soaked through the dark fabric of his shirt, a fresh, wet sheen spreading rapidly over his ribs. The stitches had torn. Midnight. Victor spat, his English heavily accented, his voice dripping with venom. He looked past Dominic toward the city skyline, toward the Meridian Hotel. It stood tall, completely intact. The charges failed. The charges were pulled. Dominic corrected his voice, a low, lethal scrape. "Your architecture is flawed, Victor. You build your traps too loud." Chloe didn't listen to the rest. Her eyes locked onto the folding table behind Victor. A heavy black leather binder sat next to a satellite phone. The ledger. She moved before she could overthink it. She kept wide of Dominic's line of fire, skirting the edge of the shadows. Victor noticed the movement. His cold eyes snapped to her. "The translator." He wheezed, a cruel smile pulling at his lips. "I wondered who broke the Weinak, a little rat hiding in the walls." He raised the silver revolver, pointing it directly at Chloe. He didn't get to pull the trigger. Dominic fired. 3 rounds center mass. The force of the bullets threw Victor backward. He slammed into the low concrete parapet and folded, sliding down the wall until he sat heavily on the wet deck. The revolver clattered away into the dark. He stared up at the stormy sky, his chest completely still. Arthur limped forward, kicking the revolver out of reach before checking Victor's pulse. "He's gone, Dom." Dominic didn't answer. He dropped his rifle. It hit the concrete with a dull clatter. His knees buckled, and he collapsed sideways, catching himself on his hands. He coughed a wet, terrible sound. Chloe sprinted to the table. She grabbed the black binder, flipping it open. Her eyes scanned the pages. Names, accounts, offshore routing numbers, payoffs to judges, police captains, port authority officials. It was the entire Eastern Syndicate mapped out in blue ink. "I have it!" She yelled over the wind, clutching the book to her chest. She ran to Dominic, sliding onto her knees beside him in the puddles of rain. He was entirely pale now. His skin felt like ice. "Arthur, help me get him up," Chloe ordered, her voice cracking. Arthur slung Dominic's right arm over his shoulder. Chloe took his left, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist, ignoring the slick warmth of his blood soaking into her jacket. Together, they hauled him upright. "We need a doctor," Arthur grunted, bearing most of the weight as they dragged him back towards the stairwell. "A real one this time." Dominic's head rolled to the side. He looked at Chloe. The cynical edge was completely stripped away, leaving only raw exhaustion. "Did you get the book?" He mumbled his words, slurring. "I got it," she said fiercely, tightening her grip on his waist. "I have your stupid book. Now you have to stay alive to pay me my 10 million. A faint, ghostly smirk touched his lips. Demanding, "Waitresses." They reached the hoist. Arthur engaged the motor, and the cage began its slow, agonizing descent back to the city. The storm raged around them, washing the blood from the iron grates. Chloe looked down at the city lights bleeding through the fog. She thought about her empty checking account. She thought about her unpaid rent. She tightened her grip on the black ledger, and she tightened her grip on Dominic Rossi. She wasn't invisible anymore. The world had tried to grind her down, but she had looked into the abyss and negotiated a payout. $10 million. And maybe, just maybe, a reason to stay in the city after all. If you felt your heart racing during Chloe's deadly wager and Dominic's brutal sacrifice, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button to support the channel and share this story with anyone who loves high-stakes romance, gritty mafia drama, and heroines who outsmart the deadliest men in the room. What would you do for $10 million? Drop a comment below. Make sure you hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling video. The underworld is always calling, and we have plenty more secrets to decode together.